It's already over a week into April, so it's time for a 2027 calendar progress update. Here are the goals I wanted to finish by the end of March. Designing 2-color images for the first 4 months, printing those designs using a combo of Tetra Pak drypoint etching and inkjet printing, and making a video about those processes. Some of my inspiration for this calendar is video game architecture. I took some photos of some of the newer buildings around my neighborhood because they have the sharp geometric lines and simple shapes I'm interested in. Then, using the Procreate app on my tablet, I outlined the buildings, created 2 color layers, and added a pattern for a little extra detail and dimension. The printing ink I plan to use is the standard cyan, magenta, yellow, and black, one for each month. For color number 2, I wanted to give secondary colors a try, and I'm starting with purple. Let's prepare the etched plate for January. Procreate makes it easy to export individual layers. So here I've got printed out the pattern I'm going to etch into Tetra Pak, along with the shape I'm going to cut the Tetra Pak plate into. I'm using tracing paper and graphite, like in my previous video. That way I can transfer the pattern to the plate. I'm making marks at the corners, so it's easier to line up the plate later when I'm transferring the graphite marks. Here I'm tracing the edge to make a clear line to cut along. I decided to simplify this line somewhat from the original drawing to make my life a little easier. Now it's time to trace a lot of tiny lines. Using the ruler keeps the marks lined up and helps me to not miss tracing one of the lines. Once the design is finished, I remove the drawing guide and secure the Tetra Pak plate to the cutting mat. The corner marks make lining things up much easier. I tape down the tracing paper and use my burnishing tool to rub over the graphite. The lines are almost all transferred. Just a little more attention to the edges, and it's done. I add another piece of tape to the top so I don't have to worry about the plate moving while I cut the edge. First, I score the line with an etching needle to give the cutting edge a little channel to follow. I use the point of the blade to start the cut around the tricky bits, because I can get more accuracy that way. When I've gone over the line once with the blade, I can remove the tape and wiggle the bottom part to see where I need to cut a bit more. I clean up the edge and the plate shape is done. I retaped the plate down to get ready for etching. This time, I'm doing 3 to 4 strokes for each line to get a deeper impression for the ink to gather in. I was dissatisfied with how shallow the etching lines were in my previous Tetra Pak plate, and I want darker inked lines for these prints. Now I'm using the burnishing tool to smooth over some line mistakes. I clean off the graphite from the plate with some rubbing alcohol, and it's ready to print. Here's where the inkjet printer comes in. I'm using the inkjet for the purple layer in the image. This way the numbers in the calendar are easy to read, and I get the same purple without needing to mix the color exactly right each time I print. Fortunately, the inkjet printer ink I use is waterproof, or I wouldn't be able to soak the paper to prepare it for the drypoint etched plate. The paper I'm using is 100-pound bright white cardstock from Lux Paper, which is pre-cut to 4-inch by 6-inch, or postcard size. As before, I let the paper soak for at least 30 minutes. I also accidentally left one batch to soak for an hour, but I didn't notice any difference when printing. I'll let these pages rest for a bit while I prepare the ink. I went somewhat overboard with the tools and process this time. So I got out the putty knife to blend aqua transparent ink with the aqua phthalo blue and get them well mixed together. Then, for some reason, I used a leftover scrap of the Tetra Pak to try and apply it to the plate. It was not a success. The scrap is way too floppy. I should have stuck to what I did in the last video, which was to use a piece of mat board to scrape the ink over the plate instead of whatever mess is happening here. Eventually, I inked up the plate, then began removing the ink. I used a piece of regular scrap paper, the way I have before, but this time that wasn't quite the right choice. For this project, I wanted the plate to be covered with a thin layer of color instead of wiping off most of the ink and leaving only the etched lines inked. For the next print run, I use a paper towel. Let's run this plate through the press. The guidelines on the press bed are really important for getting everything aligned for good registration. Fortunately, this press has an outline already marked to the size of a postcard. I get the card positioned, then place both blankets over top. Before slotting the press bed into the press and adjusting the pressure on the rollers. Let's crank it through. I'm pleased to see how well the edge of the plate embossed the paper. Let's look at the print. I'm surprised at how close I got the registration on this first pass. The pattern lines are as dark as I hoped they would be, and I like the pale swirls in the sky. I want to try to pull one more print from this plate before re-inking. The pattern lines are still really well defined, but the sky might be a touch lighter than I want. I did get a bit closer on the registration this time, which always makes me happy. I ended up re-inking off camera with a paper towel and doing another 2 prints. Here's the first 2, then the paper towel inked ones. That method gave a much darker sky on the first press with very visible swirls, while the second looked almost identical to the first print I made with the plate. I need to do some refining of my ink application and removal, but I'm getting there. I still have some work to do with registration, but I think using an etched plate on top of an inkjet print looks the way I want. It's a good feeling when an experiment turns out pleasing results. I definitely made a solid dent in my goals for this first quarter with the calendar, but as of this recording, I haven't finished one of the other goals, which was printing all of the copies for the first 4 months. I've only printed those 4 of January and haven't started printing the other 3 months. This means I've got some catching up to do, but this is all very encouraging progress, and I feel more confident about finishing January and getting through February, March, and April, then moving on to the next 4 months and finishing them before my next calendar update at the beginning of July. If you want to see how I'm progressing with the 2027 calendar and the other projects I've got planned for the coming months, please subscribe to the channel and like this video while you're at it. See you in the next one.